Hey everybody, CVH here with a deck tech today of a deck I'm calling Mastermind Assassin. I know it's not necessarily a new concept, definitely something that I've seen people try before, but I haven't really heard much about Necrom Mastermind as a competitive card in general, so I decided I'd share my version of this deck. Mostly a combination between close to the Miha XXL Assassin deck that actually he used to finish #1 Legend in August with. A combination between that and like other Assassin decks you might have seen on the ladder. I did use this to actually get back to top 5 Legend, finish #4 with it on stream. So I might as well discuss the card choices and let you know this deck is a lot of fun to play, has a lot of combo potential, really cool turns that can happen, difficult to play though. So I'll just go up the curve like usual and describe some of the card choices. Like the Miha XXL Assassin, we're running the Cruel Firebloom package. Can't really talk about this card without talking about Goblin Skulk. The whole idea there is that you pilfer, and then you get a free Firebloom from your deck, which is pretty awesome. It's thinning your deck and giving you a zero-cost action that can be used even the same turn to have some pretty cool plays with your last gasp guys. Also has synergy with the Elusive Schemers, because when the Elusive Schemer dies and puts a zero-cost version of itself into your deck, all of a sudden Goblin Skulk has that high roll potential of getting the zero-cost Schemer, and you get to put a free 4/1 on the board immediately. Obviously, if you drew the Elusive Schemer that you put into your deck immediately, it'd be kind of an insane card, so that potential is very much there. You have to think about like what you have left in your deck, how many Fireblooms, how many Schemers, because sometimes you don't want a Schemer, you really need a Firebloom to stay alive, but the plays can get pretty insane with this card, so this is definitely one of the things you're mulliganing for. Ashlander, I've talked a lot about how it's overrated recently, and I stand by that, but I do think in a deck with Necrom Mastermind and Firebloom, it's a little too good not to play. It's one of the best cards for both those combos. It's one of the best Firebloom targets, and if you just have it on board later in the game, Necrom Mastermind, getting it to deal 3 damage randomly, that essentially equates to it being double Death Rattled. So it's like double Last Gasp. So if it gets his Last Gasp effect off twice, it's dealing 6 damage to 2 random targets, or even the same random target, who knows. And if it did that, on average, it would obviously be an insane card, way too good. So in this deck, it's often very, very good. Firebolt and Ungolem, I don't really need to talk about too much. Ungolem, just another way to put some insane high roll potential in your deck, get more cycle going, which is something the deck wants to do. Definitely have a full hand all the time. Firebolt, just solid removal, of course. Balmora Spymaster I do want to talk about, because it's one of the key cards in both this deck and the Miha XXL Assassin. Since we're focusing on the last gasp, it seems like an instant inclusion. One of the best cards with Cruel Firebloom. Definitely the primary target you want to be using Fireblooms on, and something you just want to have on board for the Necrom Mastermind, because occasionally it's much better than even Deshaun Avenger if you get the last gasp off. So that being said, we do not have Soul Split to activate it, as the Miha XXL Assassin did, but we do have Dumber Nightblade to allow ourselves to get some Steel Swords and activate it like that. So definitely like at least 9 ways in our deck to get the effect off regularly, as well as it being solid defense against an AoE like Ice Storm. Cutpurse, I just think it's one of the most solid 2-drops in the game, so it doesn't really fit in any of our combos per se. We're not really looking to Cruel Firebloom this off, but it's one of the ways that we can get far ahead early in the game, so I figured might as well run it. Dumber Nightblade, like I already mentioned, it's very good to get that activation for the Balmora, because you can make it able to attack. Also, just good to have a Last Gasp in your deck again to for the Necrom Mastermind to combo with. And if a Dunmer is giving you 2 Steel Swords, all of a sudden that's 6 extra points of reach, which makes up for the fact that we don't have Cliff Racers in the deck, for example, or Crushing Blow, like the Prophecy Assassin does. So in this deck, Dunmer can actually be one of your main sources of reach outside of Lightning Bolt and Tazcad. Because all of a sudden you can find yourself with 2 or even 3 Steel Swords, and they cost 2 apiece, but that really adds up later in the game when you're just pushing for lethal. You can Necrom Mastermind, get a Steel Sword in your hand, attack with your Dunmer, Cruel Firebloom it off to put another Steel Sword in your hand, and then pop 2 Steel Swords on something, and call it a game, basically. Fighters Guild Recruit, don't really need to talk about this either, one of the staples in agility. Goblin Skulk we already discussed. Black Sap Protector is sort of a meta call. A lot of things could be in the slot. I think Dune Smuggler is pretty good in here. If you can get it on 3, you can like move a Balmora and make it a 1/2, so it can all of a sudden be able to trade. Like the same principle with the weapon, basically. But Black Sap's good against those other aggressive decks, helps you defend against Daring Cut Purses on the opposing side, and a lot of people are playing that card, so I think Black Sap's good. Another Prophecy is always welcome. House Kinsman obviously is one of the best cards in agility, and it becomes even better when we can use the Death Rat, or the Last Gasp, twice with Necrom Mastermind. All of a sudden, that can be another main source of reach if you're getting the effect off twice. So, for example, you can Necrom Mastermind, deal 3 damage to your opponent, attack with it, deal another 3 damage to your opponent, and then Cruel Firebloom to get the Last Gasp off for a second time, and that potentially makes a Kinsman deal 9 damage in a turn if you count its attack. Which, of course, we count the attack, because we're attacking a lot with this deck. Deshaun Avenger, one of the most solid things to use the Fire Blooms and the Necron Masterminds on. Obviously, Balmora is generally the primary target, but Deshaun at least doesn't mean you lose any board presence. Occasionally, Ashlander doesn't have any good targets, so playing Fire Bloom on an Avenger, actually, you keep your 3/3 on board. So, in an aggressive mirror match, when you're simply just trying to keep the board, it's often a good target to use those cards on. Schemer we already talked about, fantastic cycle. We want to keep our hand and our options flowing, which is why the Goblin Skulk is so good, because a lot of these cards only realize their full potential when comboed with other cards. Looking at you, Balmora, but it's so good when it goes off. Lightning Bolt, don't really need to talk about it. It's Lightning Bolt. We play it because it's a great prophecy. Werebat, kind of the same deal. Baron's Eye is actually one of the most insane cards in the deck, I think. At worst, it's a better Werebat on curve, and at best, giving everything else in the lane guard can actually sort of seal the deal against an aggressive deck, especially if you have a lane full of Last Gasps, which this deck seems to be running a lot of. So, for example, get your Deshans and maintain the board presence. You can, obviously, giving guard to this is great because they have to attack it and actually give you a better board. It's definitely a great card. Draining for 6 is something people have overlooked for a while, but it's kind of insane. So Satyrs Ancient is a card that I wasn't playing in this deck originally, but I did want to try it. It sort of functions as extra copies of Deshaun Avenger. Oftentimes the guard is more relevant, but there's a lot of control mage on the ladder basically, which is making this card worse than Deshaun against that deck since it gets firebolted, and they don't really care about your guard. The only reason the guard is relevant is against a deck that really wants to be hitting your face a lot. But it doesn't really hurt, obviously it's another Last Gasp. It combos with the Necron Mastermind. Since I wanted to play 3 of these, I wanted to have a little bit more consistency, so I took out the Leaf Lurkers I was playing in the slot, which didn't really fit and get activated too easily. I felt like they were kind of slow, so Satyrs Agent, just another solid thing to play on turn 4. We have no shortage of turn 4 plays, which might make this a little redundant, but it is another solid card that fits with the theme, and I've enjoyed it so far. It helps to have these cards like this in the Deshaun that give you extra board presence, because sometimes you might be hurting for a Fire Bloom target. Occasionally, that's what happens. So Necron Mastermind, kind of the reason I wanted to play this deck. I know the Mia XXL Assassin did not play it and had its own slew of combos, but I think this card is definitely overlooked right now and probably the best legendary you're not really seeing on the ladder if I had to pick one. Just having... If you have one other thing with Last Gasp on the board, all of a sudden, it becomes, instead of a subpar 5-drop 5/4, it becomes pretty good. And if you have two things, it gets very good. Like, if you can consistently get 2 Last Gasps off with this effect, it doesn't really matter which ones they are in this deck, all of them are, pretty good. I think the worst sometimes is even going to be House Kinsman when you don't care about the board. In a slow matchup, putting another 0-cost Schemer into your deck can swing the game. Getting an extra dagger, like I mentioned with the Dunmer, is going to be extra reach for you. Balmora is, one of the highest priorities. Ashlander dealing 3 damage randomly. All very good targets. And having 3 of these just increases the consistency. We can have those really big combo turns. And even Tazcad actually does have Last Gasp, even though usually when you're playing Tazcad, you're not going to be playing the game for too much longer because it's going to help you close out the game very effectively. But on the off chance you used it to kill something or deal 6, and then next turn you do it again, and just happen to get an extra 4 out of the deal, that's totally fine. Obviously, it's, one of the consistently best Last Gasps in the game. It just happens to cost 8, so we don't usually play Necrom after the Tazcad. Usually we play the cards in the order of the Magicka curve. Occasionally it goes different ways, but that's the idea. I hope you guys like the deck. I think it's a blast to play. Like I mentioned, I only have a grand total between casual and ranked of 30 games with the deck, so it's tiny sample size, definitely more room to experiment. Hopefully you guys get out there and experiment with this deck, because I think it's a lot of fun. I'm not claiming to know how the matchups should go all the time. It seems like it's favored against Archer, and it seems like it's not as bad against control decks as the Prophecy Assassin, because we're relying less on the prophecies, and we have some really sick combo turns and a lot of cycle with the elusive schemers and stuff. So I think the deck has a lot of potential in the meta and on the ladder. Got me to top 5, so it can probably get you to legend and beyond. If you liked the video, like, comment, subscribe. Stay tuned to Between the Lanes for more strategy content, and I will see you next time, guys.